All right, everyone. Welcome to a brand new deep dive. And, today we're really going to try to flip the script on something that I think a lot of English learners really get stuck on.
Yeah.
And that is the idea that speaking faster can actually help you become more fluent.
It really is one of those sort of counterintuitive ideas.
Yeah.
When we think about fluency, so often people are like, slow down, and be careful and think about the grammar and all that.
Yeah, it's like when you're first learning a language, that's what everyone tells you, right?
Exactly.
Like, take your time, enunciate, make sure you get it right.
Right.
But we're going to look at, why that might actually not be the best approach.
Right.
Especially if you're aiming for like really, really natural sounding English.
Exactly.
And the inspiration for this deep dive comes from the Easy English Talk YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, their video, Fast English Speaking, makes you fluent English speaking practice, improve English graded reader.
Okay.
So that's kind of our jumping off point for this whole discussion. And what we really want to uncover is why speaking faster can actually help you become more fluent.
Right.
Why native speakers sound so smooth and fast.
Yeah.
Like, how do they actually manage to do that?
Right.
And then, of course, give you some, tips and techniques.
Yeah.
So that you can kind of start to practice and get there yourself.
Yeah.
So let's jump right in.
Okay.
So, like we were saying, the common wisdom is that if you speak slowly, it gives you more time to think, right? And then you can get everything kind of perfect.
Right.
So why would speaking faster actually help you become more fluent?
Well, as you said, that is the initial logic.
Yeah.
And it's understandable, when you're first encountering a new language, slowing down does give you that moment to process.
Yeah.
However, if your ultimate goal is to achieve, that really natural, fluid speech that sounds like a native speaker,
Yeah.
you need to kind of shift your brain into operating more quickly.
Right.
And speaking faster essentially compels you to start thinking directly in English and to react in a more spontaneous way.
Right. So it's kind of like cutting out that middleman of like mental translation.
Precisely when your focus shifts to getting those words out at a faster pace, there's simply less time to consciously translate from your native language.
Right.
If you think about native speakers,
Yeah.
they don't internally construct sentences word by word
Right.
and pausing to analyze the grammar.
Right.
They speak in these natural flowing chunks of language.
Yeah, like that smooth, connected kind of sound.
Exactly.
And that's kind of what we're all aiming for, right?
Absolutely.
So by actually training ourselves to speak faster, are we basically like building that automatic response system?
Exactly. Your brain starts to become more adept at, rapidly forming sentences, accessing vocabulary.
Yeah.
Much like, how you effortlessly speak in your first language?
Right.
Without having to consciously dissect every word and grammatical rule?
Yeah, like you don't think about your native language, you just speak it. So is there, I'm really curious about this, is there a kind of neurological basis for this?
Yeah.
Like, does speaking faster actually do something to our brains?
Yeah, there is. So research in areas like psycholinguistics, suggests that when we challenge ourselves to speak more quickly, our brains become more efficient at language processing.
Wow.
You could almost think of it as a cognitive load adaptation.
Okay.
By automating the retrieval of words and grammar, you're freeing up mental resources for other aspects of communication, like understanding nuances or participating more actively in conversations.
It's almost like a workout for your brain.
Exactly.
Like you're forcing it to adapt to this new, way of working.
Exactly.
I don't know why this reminds me of learning a musical instrument.
Yeah.
Like when you're first learning, you're like so slow.
Yeah, you're picking out each note.
Yeah, and then you practice, and all of a sudden your fingers are just like flying across the keys.
That's a very apt analogy.
Yeah.
Because it really is about building that kind of muscle memory for language.
Yeah.
And, another significant advantage, I think, of faster speaking is that it tends to diminish that overthinking that so many of us fall prey to.
Totally, yeah.
A lot of English learners can get really stuck worrying about perfect grammar.
Oh, absolutely.
Or the absolute best word choice.
Yeah.
And when you're focused on expressing your ideas at a quicker pace, your attention naturally shifts more towards conveying your message.
Right.
Rather than those really, really minute grammatical details.
So it's almost like a confidence boosting cycle as well.
Yeah.
Because people who speak confidently often speak faster.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah, there's definite correlation.
Yeah.
As you actively practice speaking more quickly and you realize you can communicate your thoughts effectively, it builds your self-assurance, which in turn can contribute to a more natural and confident speaking rhythm.
Awesome. So let's just kind of recap, I guess, the core, benefits here that we've talked about.
Yeah.
So speaking faster helps us move away from translating.
Yes.
It actually improves our brain's efficiency in processing English.
Yes.
Like we said, it builds our confidence because we're able to do it.
Mm-hmm.
It lessens that tendency to overthink every single word.
Yeah.
And ultimately, it trains us to speak in a more natural and fluid way.
Exactly.
So much closer to how native speakers sound.
Yes.
Now, I know we were talking about some of the research behind all of this.
Yeah.
So I'd like to kind of dig into that a little bit deeper.
Sure.
What is it that makes some people so incredibly, fluent in multiple languages?
That's a question, many language learners grapple with.
Right.
A crucial element really lies in how our brains are wired to process language.
Okay.
Think of the brain as this incredibly high-speed processing unit.
Yeah.
Constantly forging connections between words, grammatical structures, meanings, to construct coherent sentences. Yeah.
And the faster we speak, the more we're essentially training our brain to execute these connections automatically.
So it's like building muscle memory, but for language pathways in the brain.
Precisely.
Yeah. Wow.
Consider the analogy of learning to type.
Okay.
Initially you might have to consciously locate each letter.
Yeah.
But with consistent practice, your fingers develop that muscle memory.
Mm-hmm.
And you can type much faster without actively thinking about the position of each key.
Right.
And speaking a language fluently at a faster pace operates on a similar principle.
Yeah.
You're training those pathways.
Well, what's really fascinating to me here is how the brain actually adapts to this increased speed.
Yeah.
Is there a specific mechanism that happens?
Yeah, so research in cognitive science, particularly studies on automaticity and second language acquisition, has shown that when individuals deliberately practice speaking faster in a new language, their brains adapt by literally shortening the time it takes to retrieve.
The necessary vocabulary and grammatical structures.
So it's physically changing.
In a sense.
To be able to access that information faster. That's so cool.
Yeah, and this accelerated processing helps the brain to start treating English as a natural integrated system.
Right.
Rather than something that needs to be constantly mediated by translation from another language.
So it becomes its own language in the brain, not just a translated version of something else.
Yeah.
That's wild. Okay. I know we touched on this a little bit before, but I'd love to hear you kind of expand on this idea of chunks of language.
Sure.
And what role that plays in all of this.
Absolutely. So our brains are naturally inclined to recognize and utilize patterns.
Right.
And native speakers, through extensive exposure and practice, naturally begin to think in common phrases.
Okay.
Or chunks of language.
All right.
These are groups of words that frequently occur together and are processed by the brain as single units. And speaking faster encourages your brain to start recognizing and processing sentences as these whole chunks.
Got it.
Rather than focusing on individual words in their sequential order.
Okay.
A simple example is the phrase, "How are you?"
Yeah.
Native speakers process that as one chunk, not three separate words that are analyzed individually.
It's a unit of meaning.
Exactly.
Not individual words.
Yes.
That's really interesting. So how does this faster processing and this idea of chunking relate to our ability to actually understand spoken English?
Yeah.
Because a lot of learners, I think, really struggle with listening.
Right.
Especially when native speakers are talking fast.
Absolutely. So it's directly interconnected.
Okay.
When you actively train yourself to speak faster, you're essentially training your brain to process language at a quicker rate overall.
Okay.
And this enhanced processing speed then makes it easier to comprehend native speakers who are speaking at a natural pace.
Got it.
That's why techniques like actively listening to fast-paced conversations and shadowing, where you try to repeat what you hear simultaneously at the same speed, are so effective for improving both speaking and listening comprehension.
So it's all connected.
Yes.
It's not just about the output, it's about the overall brain processing speed.
Exactly.
So the core message here is that by working on speaking faster, we're not just improving our spoken English.
Yeah.
but we're actually speeding up our brain's ability to process language in general.
Exactly.
Making English feel more intuitive and automatic.
Yes.
I love that. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit.
Okay.
And talk about some practical techniques that you, our listener, can start using today.
Absolutely.
To help you speak English faster.
Right.
And the first one that they emphasize in this video is shadowing.
Yeah.
So for anyone who's not familiar with shadowing, can you kind of explain what that is?
Certainly. So shadowing involves listening to a native English speaker.
Yeah.
This could be through a podcast, an audiobook, or a YouTube video. And then attempting to repeat exactly what they're saying in real time.
Okay.
Mimicking their rhythm, even their pronunciation as closely as possible.
So you're like a vocal echo.
Precisely.
Okay.
And this technique is remarkably powerful because it compels you to keep pace with the natural speed of spoken English.
Mm-hmm.
It also aids in internalizing those native pronunciation patterns and the natural flow of sentences.
Right.
Crucially, because your primary focus is on keeping up.
Yeah.
It minimizes that tendency to constantly think in your native language.
So you're so focused on just keeping up that you don't have time to translate.
Exactly.
So how often do you think someone should practice shadowing?
Yeah.
Like how long should they do it for to actually see results?
You know, even short, consistent sessions can yield really noticeable benefits.
Okay.
So aim for around 5 to 10 minutes of shadowing on a daily basis.
Got it.
The key is regularity.
Yeah. Like any skill you have to practice it.
Exactly. And in terms of, what to shadow.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, podcasts, audiobooks, or YouTube videos in English are all excellent resources.
Yeah.
Choose material that genuinely interests you to maintain engagement.
Absolutely. All right. So what's another technique that people can try?
Another highly effective method involves what are often referred to as speed drills.
Speed drills.
Yeah. So this involves selecting a short English sentence and practicing saying it initially at a slow, deliberate pace.
Okay.
Then you gradually repeat the same sentence faster and faster, pushing your speed while ensuring that you maintain clear pronunciation.
So this is almost like working out the physical mechanics of your mouth? Like training your tongue to move faster?
Exactly. It helps to build that necessary neuromuscular coordination for faster speech.
Yeah.
While ensuring that you don't sacrifice clarity for speed.
We want both.
Exactly.
So do you have a good example of like a speed drill sentence?
You know, a classic example is the tongue twister. She sells seashells by the seashore.
My gosh, yeah.
Try articulating that slowly at first.
Yeah.
And then progressively try to say it faster and faster.
Yeah, I could already feel my tongue getting twisted just thinking about that.
Yeah.
But I can see how like that would really help.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, what else can we add to this toolkit?
Another valuable technique is timed speaking.
Okay.
So simply set a timer for 1 minute.
Okay.
Choose a topic. It can be virtually anything.
Yeah.
And then try to speak continuously for that entire minute without significant pauses or hesitations.
So what's the advantage of putting yourself under that time pressure?
So initially, you'll likely find yourself pausing more frequently.
Yeah.
As you search for the right words or formulate your thoughts.
Yeah, you're like, oh my God, what am I going to say next?
Right, exactly. However, with consistent practice, you'll observe those pauses becoming less frequent.
Okay.
And your overall speaking speed and confidence will naturally improve. It compels you to think on your feet and express your ideas without getting bogged down in, meticulously planning every grammatical structure or word choice.
So you're just forced to like get it out.
Exactly.
And I think I noticed that recording yourself was also a key part of this whole process.
Absolutely.
So why is recording yourself so important?
It offers invaluable feedback that you might not otherwise be aware of.
Okay.
When you listen back to your own speech, you can more easily identify areas where you tend to slow down, hesitate, or perhaps where your pronunciation becomes unclear as you speed up.
Yeah.
And this awareness allows you to consciously focus on those specific areas for improvement in your subsequent practice sessions.
It's like you can't really hear yourself when you're just in the moment.
Yeah.
So the recording allows you to kind of step back and be like, oh, wow, I'm doing this.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize.
And additionally, it provides a tangible way to track your progress over time as your speaking becomes smoother and faster.
Awesome.
Okay.
Okay, so we've got shadowing, we've got speed drills, we've got time speaking. And we've got recording ourselves.
Yes.
So now I want to talk about some of the mistakes that people make when they're trying to speak faster.
Yeah.
Because it's not just about, going a million miles an hour.
Exactly.
So what are some things that we need to watch out for?
That's a very important area to address.
Yeah.
It's not simply about racing through your words.
Right.
One of the most common errors is sacrificing clarity in the pursuit of speed.
Right.
Some learners attempt to speak very quickly, but they end up mumbling, slurring their words, or omitting sounds.
Which makes it impossible to understand.
Exactly. Which ultimately makes their English very challenging for others to understand.
Right, because fluency isn't just about the rate of speech.
Exactly.
It's about how clearly you can communicate your ideas.
Exactly. It's about that smooth and clear communication of your thoughts.
So if your pronunciation is terrible, it doesn't matter how fast you're going.
It's exact. No one's going to understand you.
Right.
So what's another common mistake?
Another common pitfall is continuing to mentally translate from your native language while trying to speak more quickly.
Right.
And this internal translation process inherently introduces a delay and slows down your speech, even if you're consciously trying to accelerate your delivery.
So again, it's that idea of trying to think in English
Absolutely.
as much as possible.
This is why learning common phrases and expressions as whole units rather than translating them word by word is so crucial.
Yeah.
You want to bypass that intermediary step of your native language processing.
Chunking.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. I think another thing that people might not think about is pausing.
Yeah.
So can pausing actually be a problem when you're trying to speak faster?
Yeah. Definitely.
Okay.
So some learners, in their eagerness to speak quickly, might just talk in a continuous stream without incorporating any natural pauses.
And this can make it quite difficult for listeners to follow their train of thought and can even sound a bit overwhelming.
It's like you need a moment to breathe.
Exactly.
And to let the listener process what you just said.
Right.
So it's not just about speed, it's also about pausing in the right places.
Precisely. Natural pauses after key ideas or before emphasizing important words actually enhance clarity and contribute to a more fluent and confident delivery.
So those pauses can actually make you sound more confident.
Absolutely.
Not less.
It gives you that moment to kind of gather your thoughts and emphasize the key points.
Yeah, I think the last mistake that they mentioned in the video was focusing only on the speed.
Yes.
And not thinking about rhythm and intonation.
Absolutely.
So how does that play into this?
That's a very insightful point.
Right.
Even when you are speaking quickly, your English should still sound smooth and expressive, not robotic or monotone intonation. The rise and fall of your voice and stress, emphasizing certain words, are fundamental for conveying meaning and sounding natural regardless of your speaking speed.
So you can speak fast, but still sound natural.
Exactly.
As long as you have that good rhythm and intonation.
Precisely.
Cool. Okay, so let's recap those mistakes real quick.
Sure.
So don't sacrifice clarity by mumbling or, slurring your words together.
Right.
Make sure you're thinking in English.
Yes.
As much as possible, try to cut out that translation step.
Reduce that translation.
Remember to pause.
Yes.
In the right places.
Natural pauses.
And don't just focus on speed. Make sure you're also thinking about your rhythm and your tone.
Exactly.
Because that's going to make you sound so much more natural.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now let's move into talking about how people can actually build these faster speaking habits into their daily routine.
So consistency is absolutely paramount.
Yeah.
When it comes to language acquisition and developing faster speaking skills is no exception.
It's like any other skill you have to practice it.
Exactly. Yes. So one of the initial recommendations Julia made was to incorporate simple warm-up exercises for your mouth and tongue.
Oh, warm-ups for our mouth.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever done that.
Yeah. So just as athletes warm up their muscles before physical activity, warming up your articulators, your mouth, tongue, and licks can help you speak more smoothly and fluently.
Okay.
And tongue twisters are a fantastic way to do this.
Oh, yeah.
Dedicate just 2 to 3 minutes each day.
Okay.
To repeating sentences like, Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers, or red lorry, yellow lorry.
Yeah.
Start slowly and gradually increase your speed as you become more comfortable.
Okay, so it's like you're getting those muscles moving.
Exactly.
Before you actually, start speaking English.
Precisely.
That's cool. Okay, so what else should we be doing on a daily basis?
So we discussed shadowing earlier.
Yeah.
And making this a consistent daily habit is crucial. So set a realistic goal, even if it's just 5 minutes of shadowing a native English speaker each day. Okay.
And to keep it interesting and engaging, choose audio or video content that you genuinely find enjoyable, whether it's YouTube videos, TED Talks, or podcasts on topics that pique your interest.
And what about those like timed speaking exercises?
Absolutely.
Should we be doing those every day?
Incorporate those 1-minute speed talks into your daily routine.
Okay.
Pick a random topic.
Yeah.
It could be something you did that day, a movie you watched, or an opinion you have.
Yeah.
Set your timer and speak continuously.
Okay.
Each time you do it consciously, try to push yourself to speak just a little bit faster.
Yeah.
While maintaining clarity.
Right.
Recording these sessions can be particularly valuable for tracking your progress.
Yeah.
And identifying areas where you can improve.
So it's all about that consistent practice.
Yes.
And getting feedback on how you're doing.
Exactly.
And then, of course, like the most important thing is to actually have conversations, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you can do all this practice by yourself, but you have to actually use it. Yes, make a concerted effort to practice speaking, even if it's just for a few minutes each day, with a friend who is also learning a language tutor or in online language exchange groups.
Yeah.
The more you practice speaking at a faster pace in real conversational settings, the more natural and automatic it will become.
Totally. So to sum up, our ideal daily routine could look something like this.
Yeah.
2 to 3 minutes of tongue twisters. 5 minutes of shadowing.
Yep.
1 minute of timed speaking.
Right.
And then, if possible, some real conversation practice.
Absolutely.
As much as you can get.
Yes, and if you commit to this kind of consistent daily practice, you will undoubtedly see a significant improvement in your speaking speed and overall fluency over time.
Absolutely. All right. So we have covered so much today.
Yeah.
We've talked about, why speaking faster can actually help you become more fluent. We've looked at the science behind it.
Yes.
We've given you practical techniques. We've talked about common mistakes. And we've even given you a daily practice routine.
Yeah.
So what is like the one thing that you want our listener to take away?
The most crucial thing to keep in mind, I think, is that developing faster speaking skills is a gradual process that requires consistent practice.
Yeah.
However, it's not just about the raw speed of your delivery. It's fundamentally about cultivating clear, smooth, and confident communication.
Absolutely. And to you, our listener out there, please don't be afraid to make mistakes.
Yes.
Every time you practice, every time you try to speak a little bit faster, that's a step in the right direction.
Absolutely.
So don't let perfection be the enemy of good when it comes to speaking English.
Right.
So what's like a good challenge that we can give our listeners today?
So here's a practical challenge for you.
Yeah.
Pick just one of the techniques we discussed today, perhaps shadowing those fun tongue twisters or even the 1-minute speed talks.
Yeah.
And commit to practicing it every single day.
Yeah, just start.
Just take that initial step.
Just do one thing.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive today.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure.
It's been really fun, and we hope that you found it insightful and helpful.
Yes.
And remember, keep practicing, keep speaking, and you'll be amazed at how quickly you start to see results.
Absolutely.
All right, everyone, take care and happy learning.
Yes, happy learning, everyone.
And here's just a final thought for you to kind of chew on.
Okay.
Think about how consciously recognizing and applying those chunks of language that we talked about, like native speakers do, could not only help you speak faster and more fluently, but also significantly improve your listening comprehension.
Absolutely.
And maybe even reduce that feeling of being overwhelmed by rapid spoken English.
Yeah.
So that's something to think about as you continue your English learning journey.
Yeah, it's a really powerful concept.
All right, that's it for today. We'll see you next time.
Bye, everyone.